Sakuna of Rice and Ruin is an interesting game that straddles the line between farming sim and action platformer. Like, legit, I am not sure if I want to call it a farming sim with an action minigame or an action explorer with a management minigame. So let's get into the story. Sakuna of Rice and Ruin story is a pretty bland one. Simple formula, you play as a Silver Spoon kid who gets sent to a farm to build character. In the prologue, we see the setup. Bunch of hooligans somehow get to the lofty realm where the gods live and make a big mess. As you attempt to stop them, you accidentally burn your tribute to the big goddess, resulting in you being banished to the Demon Island for not being able to offer tribute. You can return home when you've conquered the island for the big goddess. Turns out, Mom and Dad used to live on the island, and their home is still kinda there. You rebuild the home, you spend the rest of the game living there, growing rice, and squaring away the mini-stories that deal with the hooligans that you had to bring with you. Ultimately, you have to slay the demon that your father fought to a draw, and eventually lost to years and years ago. Characters in the game are really, really boring. Like, they're all incredibly flat tropes. Sakuna, main character, born with a silver spoon in her mouth, has to learn hard work. Tama, Sakuna's guardian, way too soft on her, but is ultimately an endearing old doggy, which also happens to be the only dog in the game that you cannot pet, which is really, what a shame. I need to pet this dog. Foreign lady, believes in Jesus, and doesn't speak Japanese, or as they call it in the game, Yanato, very well. Who can blame her? So she winds up being the maid of the house, has to kind of be the mom to the kids. Big dude, fucking liar. I have a sword, but I was always more of a farmer. Okay, buddy, do some farming. Actually, I was always pretty shit at farming because I would trample the plants and break things. Bro. Little boy, likes swords and making stuff, pretty normal. Little girl, actually a crane. Likes sewing, and for the longest time, I thought she was a monster in disguise. Turns out she kinda is, but not really. It's weird. She's also pretty normal. Mute kid can talk to animals because of course he can. Of course the mute guy can talk to animals. He's not mute, but he's kind of mute. The characters are presented, and outside of their function as NPCs for like shops and upgrades, they're really not good for much else. They don't play any major impact on the story. The little boy is important because he winds up reforging the weapon that you wind up using to finish the game. But outside him, I don't believe any of the other characters, other than Sakuna and Tama, of course, really matter to the main story. The side stories are uninteresting, though I will admit that the one dealing with the little girl, Yui, that one threw me for a loop. I wasn't expecting aliens in this game. But in general, the stories are uninteresting IMO. I think the game really pulls a lot of punches with the characters, resulting with them being their trope for the entirety of the game. I probably could have bought the story a little bit more had it actually tried to have consequences. Give a dude an eye patch, something that shows that the story is impacting them beyond their role as exposition or NPC. There are several deaths that are baited and then backed out on. And I'm not saying I want characters to die. But I do feel ripped off when you tell me the MacGuffin will require the sacrifice of my firstborn child. And I don't really want to do it. But in the end, I decide that some things are more important. And when I use it, the MacGuffin decides to change its mind and decide I can do it for free. It's just really cheap. To back up a bit to the little girl's mini story, like she has to give up something to maintain her human form, and it's not revealed what she gave up, but it really doesn't seem to have impacted her, like at all. So I have no idea. Like it's just really cheap. The game plays the character trope straight like an arrow too. Like it's exhausting. At times, the boy is always going to be a rascal. The girl's always going to be kind of flirty. Sakuna will be told that something has to be gathered, and we all know it's the player, right? We all know she's going to gather it, but she's still going to complain. Why do I got to do all the work around here? And she completely forgets that the other guys do the cooking, the cleaning, and they do just as much farming as her, if not more. It gets really tiring because the game pretends that Sakuna's lazy when I've legit been on this island for like 20 years. 20 years I've been farming, working hard every month, gathering materials every month. Like, can we stop pretending that Sakuna isn't a hard worker now? Because she puts in the work. Now here, we kind of need to start splitting into the farming versus action elements. So what I do like is that your progress in farming directly impacts your progress in fighting, and vice versa. There's no traditional leveling system in the game. How do you power up? Well, at the end of the year, you harvest your rice, and as a half-harvest goddess, you gain power based on the quality of your rice. Now, this is actually really cool, and I like this a lot. When you harvest your rice, you're forced to choose between food buffs and stats based on how you harvest it, and that's pretty interesting too. The primary way in which exploration and combat feed back into farming is that the materials you gather out there can be used to improve your yields. This is kind of nice because if you ever feel walled, you just farm for a year while focusing on stats and then try again when in spring and summer when they roll back around. Food buffs are really powerful. Not a whole lot to really say about them. Buff your stats, gain resist, pretty simple. Equipment is interesting. Near as I can tell, defense, as far as defense goes, there's no stats, just resist based on equipment and food skills. Pieces of equipment have their own unique skills baked into them, but they sometimes have slots to put gems into as well. You will acquire skill gems throughout the game that boost your stats or gather rates or whatever. You can upgrade these gems by spending amber, which is kind of like money. Like, there's no money in this game. Amber is the closest thing to it, but it's really only used for a few specific things. So it's kind of weird. But yeah, you can upgrade the gems by spending amber. That's it. What I found interesting was that you could swap these gems at any time, even during combat. You can make a magic or a strength build, and it's like, okay, you'll do magic damage or physical damage. What you do kind of need to be wary of are the 4 types of damage: slash, strike, pierce, and magic. Certain enemies are resistant and weak to certain types of attacks. No real way to tell. Just gotta look at the damage number color. That said, being able to swap out gems at any time is incredibly convenient, because if you see that your damage is being resisted, blue numbers, you can just swap out to a gem that changes attack type to something else and see what the enemy's weak to. And then you can just go ham with the appropriate damage type. Combat, really wonky, and wonkiness is why I hesitate to fully commit to calling it an action explorer with a farming minigame. You have a grapple. You use it for exploring and for combat. You have 2 attack buttons, heavy and light attack. You can also use skills a la Tails series, where the D-pad skill plus the skill button is a skill button. You have a second set of skills that apply for when your grapple is on the enemy, but these are primarily setup or debuff abilities. You can parry enemies, and in some cases it's required if you want to apply your grapple debuff. What's pretty amusing is that friendly fire is on. Enemies can and will kill each other, and you can knock enemies into spiked rocks, do damage to them, then the knockback from being hit into the spikes will knock them into the spikes again. So you just wind up, they wind up, damage boosting into the rock again and again until they die. It's really convenient. I took advantage of this a few stages where the cannon enemies will fire their cannons even if you're not in the line of fire, and just have them wipe out their own goons. The bomb-throwing rabbits were the most handy, though, because I could, stand in the middle of a group, grapple up, grab the ceiling, and when the bombs came in, watch the rabbits as they did 4k damage to their allies, saving me the trouble of fighting. It's funny. Exploration is a mixed bag. A lot of the stages have specific gimmicks, and they're not terribly interesting gimmicks. One is kick an enemy or rock into a wall to break it, or another one was ride the bubbles. A couple had avoid the hot water or an enemy will continuously fire a cannon gimmicks. It's not hard to progress, but eventually I got to the point where I got tired of it and I just wanted to dash through the stages to the bosses, just wrap this thing up. The game is really forgiving on failure. Death only sets you back to the beginning of the stage, and it doesn't even come with a penalty in the way of time in the day-night cycle. It autosaves as you enter the screen, so you go back to the time as well if you die. Death really only happens if you're not really prepared for something you're coming up against. Maybe it's your first time fighting night enemies or something, and you do no damage and they do all of the damage. But using the grapple gives you iframes, so it's really easy to iframe to a lot of an enemy's attacks. Even failing that, if you find your health getting low and you don't want to lose progress, just pause, return the map. You can do this at any time and there are no penalties for it. It's crazy. But this brings me to my main complaints. My main complaint with the combat is that I often don't get what I want, and I swear I'm pressing the buttons correctly. It really felt like I was fighting the combat buttons at times. I really wound up just leaning hard on 2 or 3 skills, one for aerial, one for knockback, and a quick attack for the entirety of the game. The grapple skills are completely optional. I set them. I never really used them. The grapple was legit just my iframe button. Most annoying was how the enemies got iframes if I knocked them down. So when you knock an enemy down for the kill and they survive at 2 HP, you gotta wait 3 seconds for them to stand right back up so you can damage them again, toss out your meaty attacks. I don't see why I shouldn't be able to use my hoe to till them like the soil on the ground. But thank goodness that the grapple was pretty optional, because the grapple is really awkward to use. I was playing on controller, and when I used the D-pad or stick, I had a really hard time with the diagonal grabs, to the point where I just stopped using them in favor of just straight up grabs with a jump into a horizontal grab. This doesn't work for a few sections of the game, one of which I wound up just using a damage boost, because the diagonal grapple is just so insufferable. This is doubly unfortunate because it's clear that the exploration and the combat were built around this idea of grappling extensively. Grapples, again, are your main source of debuffs, and it's not clear which enemies require parries to debuff and which do not. This is annoying, because if you come across an enemy you've never seen before, you might be tempted to just throw out your defense debuff skill, but this isn't going to work because it's one of those parry first enemies. Game didn't communicate this to you, and you just sort of stand there grappling it, vulnerable to attack while you react. Wait, why isn't my debuff working? Following on with exploration, while exploring stages, there will be certain parts where you'll be required to beat some number of spawned enemies to proceed, and you'll be locked in one of those old beat-em-ups where the screen doesn't move left or right. This is whatever, but it's annoying because the game feels like it wants to be exploration, but it wants to be combat as well. And these two don't mesh together well. The combat locks are really the only thing that prevent me from just breezing through the stages. But sometimes I want to breeze through the stage because my objective is one of those stupid stage side quests which don't involve combat. So this is compounded even further with my next complaint, which is stage hazards. The hot water and poison stages exist to force me to food buff against them. It's so dumb. The poison stages especially. The HP drain on them, if you don't have something like Poison Resist 3, is ridiculous. Sure, you could get through them and then wait in a corner for your HP to recover naturally, but this kills the pacing. Now, remember that the game does have a day-night cycle, and you only have so long with your food buffs. So if you happen to be in one of these poison stages, your poison resistance only lasts so long as your food buffs last. So being forced to fight in the poison when your objective is one of those side objectives to find the material just becomes very stressful. Is my food buff going to last long enough, or am I going to have to be forced to go home and try again consuming the ingredients again? Stage hazards in general do not really provide anything of value IMO. The bouncing mushrooms were funny once, and the water bubbles required for progress were really, really slow. I hate waiting for elevators in real life, let alone in my games. The fire and poison are annoying to buff against, but the real offenders are the spikes and pointy rocks. I would often quick attack into them by mistake, resulting in my death. Honestly, I probably killed myself more on these rocks than anything else in the game. There were a couple of spikes that were set up like where your jump was just high enough to clear them, but if you just jumped a little too far back, you'd wind up landing on the spikes, and you just land on them again and again for like 60 damage, way too many times. Is it a fuck up in execution? Yes, I admit. Doesn't mean I can't find it annoying. The biggest offender of not clearly communicated is the final fight of the game, during which a completely new mechanic is introduced, which is all but required to beat it. It's a really powerful gimmick. You can block all damage to kind of charge up like Bide and Pugimon, and then blast the boss with a bomb when it's charged. Thing is, this ability eats SP, and the game did not tell you this. So I ate a few deaths to the final boss because I didn't realize that when I was using my skills between attack patterns that I'd used up all the SP that I was supposed to save for the special skill. Then on top of that, it seems you have to soak up some amount of damage for the bomb to work, which is whatever. But how do you know you soaked up enough? Well, the grapple will turn a rainbow color. Just one small problem though. The grapple's very tiny on your tiny model on the screen. To demonstrate the point, let's play a game. I'm going to play a clip of me fighting the final boss, which is the only place this thing is even used, and then pause it. You tell me, can I use the ability or not? Ready? Can I use it? Can I use it? Can I use it? Hopefully these examples have demonstrated how little this indicator is in the event that you missed the first flash, which I think is easy to miss as well, but I don't know, my eyesight. It would have been better to communicate a full charge via a number of other methods, make your SP bar glow rainbow, add a rainbow ball around the character, some kind of clear visual indicator beyond the brief flash which you get that indicates that a full charge is ready, since you can hold on to the bomb. Speaking of things that are difficult to see, maybe this is just my eyesight being really poor, because it really is poor, but I felt that at times enemies would just sort of blend into the background, and I had a hard time in certain fights because the palettes would just start to blur together and I couldn't see anything. As for story, I'll be real with you, I don't get it. I don't understand how it goes all, you defeated evil, when you beat the final boss, and it was forgiven, or whatever. Like, they've been trying to spin this thread of, like, the demons are not evil, just misguided, throughout the entire game, but it really doesn't, it doesn't develop into that state naturally, and it doesn't even work the way they did it. Another thing that kind of got me was that you're kind of expected to read the rice manuals to learn how to raise your rice a specific way. It doesn't really bother me since it's available pretty easily, but it just strikes me as flawed, as rather than guiding someone towards the proper way to grow rice, and maybe there isn't a proper way, there's so many ways, right? You just give them the book and say, hey, follow the recipe. I don't know how much the rice farming relates to real life rice, so maybe this was just a kludge because they didn't really have a good way to do it. It's whatever. That said, I think the game is really accessible, and it kind of vibing. I personally enjoyed farming more than the combat, weird as that might be to say. I'm told it's really in-depth, and I can believe it. Not gonna find out, but I can believe it. The game isn't for everyone, but it does provide what I think is a fairly unique experience, which might overstay its welcome just a tad in the second half, but it's ultimately quite charming and enjoyable. Sakuna based? I gotta say, the game could be surprisingly based. Now, some of this might get me censored on YouTube. So the last section here is only available on Odyssey. If you're watching this on YouTube, the Odyssey link is in the description, and I'll just have to end the video here. Thanks for watching.